So it's wonderful to have a full house today, but please let us know if if you need a seat or if you need extra copies of something, let us know and we'll try to meet those needs. Okay, on our agenda next, what we wanted to do was start looking at, you heard the model this morning that was the recipient of the first prize that we gave out at the Salute. And now we're going to look at some other models because a lot has happened in those 3 years where some models that we're developing became a little bit more mature, where some new opportunities and issues presented themselves that required collective impact. And so we're going to learn both from kind of local models as well as we'll have some keynote with national models. But one of the local models that has been around for about 10 years now is Alignment Nashville. And if you read Alignment Nashville's mission statement, it says that, Alignment Nashville is to help nonprofits better align to serve the strategic plan of Metro Schools. And so that tells you a little bit about Alignment Nashville, but I think what is equally more important about Alignment is that it's an organization that really is a local laboratory of collective impact. And collective impact is, as you read, is a very common term now in both nonprofits and foundation work. And we are really fortunate in Nashville to have Alignment and other examples of collective impact that are continuously growing and changing and being redesigned to better meet the needs and the opportunities. So I want you to listen to this next presentation. It's from Sydney Rogers and Melissa. And Sydney and Melissa both have deep roots in education administration. They were at Nashville Tech together as well. And they followed each other from the Renaissance Center to Nashville State to now Alignment Nashville. So I learned that as I was preparing for this. I've known them for a while. I'm privileged to serve on the board of Alignment Nashville, and we're talking strategically about what does the next 10 years mean for Alignment Nashville, but in the context of what does Nashville need Alignment Nashville to be in the next 10 years. And that's a really important question and one the board is grappling with just as things change with schools. And education's one of those issues that requires collective impact, right? Because it's not an issue that any one organization can try to address alone. So Alignment has about 100 local organizations working together to try to continuously realign to better meet the needs of Metro Schools and the strategic plan. So while you might not have that as your goal, if you think about whether your goal's in the health arena or the food security arena, kind of what are the tools that you will need in your toolbox to be really successful in collective impact and to be able to coordinate, to be able to measure, to be able to communicate. So if you listen with that ear, no matter whether your plans are as grand as working with 100 organizations or as modest as working with 5 organizations, I think you'll find something of value. And so I'm bringing up the dynamic duo of Sydney Rogers and Melissa Jaggers.
So I'm the Melissa part of the dynamic duo. Sydney's going to be coming up in a minute to share a little bit more, but just gave me a new idea for a Halloween costume now. That's good. But we are here to talk a little bit about collective impact and what that looks like through Alignment Nashville and through some work that we're actually doing across the country. So Joanne obviously is a great board member because she can very clearly articulate who we are and what we do. But we are a 501c3 that does align resources to support the strategic plan of the school district, as well as children's health and the success of our community as a whole. And we are described oftentimes as an operating system. If you think about your iPhone or your computer, it has to have an operating system that makes all of the apps or the programs on your computer or your phone work more effectively. And I think that's a great way of describing Alignment Nashville. In Nashville, it is that operating system or that tool set is being brought to bear on education and health, but we're seeing it being used in other parts of the country. The very same tools that we're using here are being used in economic development. They're being used in crime reduction in lots of different sectors across the country. So we're real excited to see that. We did bring some of our annual reports. I couldn't carry enough for each one of you to come in here, but there are some kind of sprinkled across the room. And if you find one of us, we'll be happy to get one of those to you after today, or you can go online and see those. So we've heard a great description of collective impact today. And I think, when friends or family ask me what I do, a lot of times it's kind of hard to say that quickly. I don't have my elevator speech down quite yet. But I think one thing I always say is that the easiest way to understand that is that we are bringing our resources to bear on the same outcomes, that we're trying to work towards the same things in a measurable way. And so the needles that through Alignment Nashville that we're trying to move, you see on the screen right now: graduation rate, college readiness, career readiness, children's health and wellness, and community prosperity. Pretty simple, right? It's really not. We know, everybody in this room knows, that these are what we call wicked problems. These are not things that are solved overnight, maybe if ever. They're very interconnected. They require lots of different perspectives that are brought to bear on these issues. And you really, once you start peeling back the layers of any one of those issues, you start to find how connected they are to everything that each other's doing. And so when you have these wicked problems, you really have to have that collective impact kind of solution if you're going to address those as a community. And so through Alignment Nashville, we do believe that it takes those diverse perspectives and that we have to address it from multiple angles. And this is a graphic description of maybe one area. So if you see at the top of the pyramid, it's the little graduation cap, which is our symbol for increasing graduation rates. That is a long-term goal. That is a very lofty goal. We're seeing that needle move. If any of you know, we are seeing incredible graduation rate improvements here in Nashville. But if you look underneath that, you'll see each one of those blocks represents an alignment committee, or what we now call alignment teams, and what that committee or team is doing to affect the graduation rate. So I know that print's small, but if you look on that first row, you see there's a team around adolescent sexual responsibility. And that team is filled with content experts and volunteers from across the community that are working on making sure our students have the access to resources they need to be sexually responsible. High school, working on, obviously, for increasing graduation rates, we have to be working on what's happening in the schools, improve school climate and culture. And as you move down, you start to see behavioral health. I'm sure many of you know how important social emotional learning is to the success of our students. As we heard earlier, the importance of making sure our refugee and immigrant families have the support and services they need, that our parents are engaged. And as you keep moving down to that bottom row, pre-K, early childhood education, we know how important that is for increasing our high school graduation rates. Third grade reading and third grade math proficiency, and school nutrition. And that's just one representation of how we're bringing all of those different perspectives to bear, and those are actual action plans and initiatives that are in place right now. And those actually represent midterm outcomes that are working towards that long-term outcome of high school graduation. And I think this is also a great, you heard so many times already today, the sum of the parts is greater. I always say that backwards. The sum of the whole is greater than the parts, right? So that's the great, and I just totally ruined it by getting it backwards, but you know what I mean. And so obviously, I'm not going to read through these again all the way, but the conditions of collective impact, we do understand, through that literature, how important that was. It was very affirming when that article came out in 2011 in the Stanford Social Innovation Review. We had people sending it to us going, "They're describing you." We said, "Well, I know, it's very, somebody finally gets what we're doing." And so that common agenda is important. I would say that doesn't always exist already. It's not that you're always finding organizations that have an agenda that already matches yours, but sometimes there's a process that's necessary to actually develop that common agenda. And that's one thing that we really focus on through Alignment Nashville. Shared measurements and systems, very important. Mutually reinforcing activities. Trust and continuous communication. I loved what Michael said earlier. I mean, just sitting down with people, which happens across our community through Alignment Nashville. Almost every day of the month, sitting down with people and planning together and understanding their job and understanding their world a little better builds that trust and communication, and that really brings a lot of community development benefit. And then finally, a backbone or intermediary organization, which Alignment Nashville is. We add 3 additional conditions that we believe create what we call 3D collective impact. And if you have one of the annual reports on your table, that's the title of our last report, and we just think that that reflects that collective impact can also be multidimensional. And those three conditions would be that you actually have community-wide tactics, action plans. So using that common agenda that maybe you find with others or that you develop to then create an actual action plan that you're implementing together. That there's fidelity of implementation, so that there's a structure for accountability across that collective impact initiative. And then again, the cross-sector resource alignment, which is so important. Not just collaborating, not just communicating, but really truly aligning resources across sectors. So what does this look like in Nashville? One example that we point to very often, how many of you are familiar with or have heard of the Academies of Nashville? I love how many hands are up. That's great. That is, the Academies of Nashville is, we say one of, but I would like to say it's the most successful district-wide high school transformation effort in the country. And what does that mean? It means that Nashville, the schools and the community together, completely transformed 12 of its high schools. And turn those into, using the academy model, turn those into places where students learn in the context or a theme every day. It's completely changed teaching and learning in the classroom. It's changed what the school day looks like for teachers and students, and it's especially changed what partnerships look like, what the schools need, what they're working with partners to do. And just as further proof, we did actually, if you remember, President Obama was here in January 2014, and we were so proud and excited that he was here to recognize Nashville's efforts and to hold the Academies of Nashville up as a national model for reform and community engagement. And also, we've had more than 1,300 people from across the country and now from the United Kingdom that have actually come to see the Academies of Nashville and take that information back to reform their own. So briefly, there we go. Looking again at those conditions of collective impact and how did those bring about a transformation, a systemic change that's of that magnitude. The common agenda was high school reform. That agenda did not exist. We used the alignment process to bring that about, to actually create that shared vision. Shared measurements and systems. Vast amount of work went into creating accountability systems, to creating an evaluation plan, and also utilizing the school district's rich resource and data warehouse. Mutually reinforcing activities, business engagement in high schools is a perfect example of a mutually reinforcing activity. Schools need business partners to help them make the experience more relevant and engaging for students. Business partners need the schools to be preparing the workforce that they need in the future. It's a perfect example of that. Trust and continuous communication, again, pointing back to that shared vision between the community and the schools. It wasn't the community coming and saying, you've got to do something, and the schools resisting that. It was a partnership to develop that trust developed out of that process. And then a sustainable structure for communication going on in an ongoing manner. Backbone and intermediate organizations. In this case, we're very blessed, I think, in Nashville to have a multitude of support for the Academies of Nashville. Alignment Nashville does provide that backbone support for the Academies of Nashville. We also have intermediary organizations. Pencil Foundation and the Chamber provide much needed support for the business partners that are engaging in the schools for work-based learning opportunities. Community-wide tactics, business engagement structure, so actually having a way to go out and engage those partners was a plan that the high school alignment team developed and implemented. And then now we're back to working on another aspect of academies, which is advisory. I would love to tell you more about that and how your organization can engage through that if you want to find me after we're done. Fidelity of implementation, continuous improvement and accountability is crucial to anything of this magnitude, and that was overseen by the high school alignment team. And then finally, cross-sector alignment, looking at all the different sectors that were engaged and crucial to this: education, business, nonprofits, and government. One other example that we're very proud of and that we think has had a huge impact in Nashville has been our school nutrition initiative. And you know, everybody loves to see that. We're very proud of what happened in that first year of the pilot. And I like to start with that because that kind of gets your attention. But in our pilot year, we saw an 86% increase in fresh fruits and vegetables that were served in pilot schools in MMPS. We're seeing continued results. We've seen that recipes that are served in the schools have been completely reformulated to have more scratch cooking. I don't know if you remember your days in the school cafeteria. You may or may not have had much scratch cooking, but we're actually seeing a resurgence of that in our schools, which is so exciting. That would not have happened had we not had the conditions for collective impact. And I won't go through these in great detail just because our time is somewhat limited. But I will point out that number 4, the trust and continuous communication, was so important. If this had been the community coming in and forcing change or demanding change in the school district, it wouldn't have worked and it wouldn't have stuck. This was something that the school district and the community developed together and said, we're in this together, we're going to hold each other accountable for it, and then that's how you get that forward-moving progress. The community-wide tactics, number 6, together again with the community, we had extensive professional development, parent and neighborhood engagement. All those aspects came together to have that impact. Okay, and I'll hand it over to Sydney. The other half of the dynamic duo.
Thanks, Melissa. I just love being in Nashville and living here and hearing about all of the fabulous work that is going on. I really enjoyed hearing about the collaboration this morning. And I will tell you this about Melissa Jaggers, since she was saying she's the other half. She is an expert violinist. And if you didn't know that about her, now you do. And so usually she does this part. I don't know how I ended up with it. But anyway, this is one of our original graphics that kind of describe what we're really after with, that we originally were after with Alignment Nashville, and that is improved student achievement. And I guess it's a little bit hard to see, but the score on the conductor's page is about is the school district strategic plan. And so, you know, our founders said somebody has to be kind of driving the bus, and for us, it's the school district. We all have to get behind the school district strategic plan in order to make this work in terms of collective impact and bring the community around the schools. So this little quote from Drucker: each institution is autonomous and has to do its own work the way each instrument and orchestra plays its own part. But there's also the score, the community, and only if each individual instrument contributes to the score is there music. Otherwise, there's only noise. And this is about the score. And Melissa talks about when you go into the symphony and they're warming up, it's pretty noisy. It's not that they don't play beautiful music individually, but it's just that noise at the beginning. So there's a book that we both like, The Checklist Manifesto. Any of you have read that? It's really good. And so a few quotes from that. The capability of individuals is not proving to be our primary difficulty. See, we're all pretty good. We're all really good. In fact, we have a lot of experts in this room, in our community, in our organizations. But we still aren't there. We still haven't figured out how to solve the big, wicked problems that she described. And so they still persist, despite this remarkable individual ability that we have. And if you understand systems, you will understand that optimizing parts is just not a good route to system excellence. So if what we're trying to do is to create systems in our community that are excellent, we can optimize the parts all day long, but until we really get to fine-tuning the system, we're not there. So that's what we're trying to figure out. But I really like this one. This is about true complexity, and where the knowledge required exceeds that of any individual and unpredictability reigns. Efforts to dictate every step from the center will fail. People need room to act and adapt, yet they cannot succeed as isolated individuals either. Instead, they require a seemingly contradictory mix of freedom and expectation. Expectation to coordinate, for example, and also measure progress toward common goals. And I heard that in the presentation earlier. You know, we have to have that. Every organization and every individual wants to do things their own way, and they need that and we need to tap into the creativity and multiple perspectives that we have in our community. But we also have to have an accountability system so that we can measure the results. And that really is contradictory, and it's really hard for organizations to come to terms with that. It's hard for us to understand how to do it. Figuring out how to measure these results is the hardest part. Alignment has been in existence for 10 years, and we have made probably every mistake in the book. Because we call ourselves pioneers, and all that really means is that you don't know what you're doing. And so we have made lots of mistakes, but I think we're finally starting to figure out what the real issues are and starting to figure out how to measure the collective impact that we have been trying to do all of these years, and that is really, really the key. I guess I'm getting ahead of myself, so just a second. Backwards. Okay. So just a couple of things that we like that have informed our work as in collective impact is this collaborative leadership mindset. These kind of keys from folks at Cisco. The resources as shared instruments of action. So Melissa talked about that just a little bit. Collective impact to us goes to the point of actually sharing resources and understanding that those resources are really instruments that we need to use together. And that's where the term alignment, we've talked about changing our name over the years, but we really understand that it is about alignment. It's about alignment on multiple levels, and one of those is aligning the resources. Authentic leadership without passive aggressiveness. I don't know if any of you can relate to that. Transparent decision making. We tried really hard to develop a system in which the decision making is transparent. So that really, another thing is that alignment to us is not us, the staff, because we don't make any of the decisions. What happens in alignment is that people in the community come around the table. All we do is facilitate the conversation. People in the community come around the table and make those transparent decisions. And I think this last one, structured relationship between decision-making rights, accountability, and rewards. That's really hard. There's a lot of risk involved. Nobody wants to take the risk. Everybody wants to be part of the rewards. So it's hard to find that balance. Collaborative leadership builds trust, transparency, and predictability. And we've heard a lot about that today already. I'm not going to go through these in detail. This is a slide that Laurie Priest from Rockford, Illinois, and I kind of put together for presentations we're making around the country when we're talking about systemic change here. And I think this is a little bit out of order, so I'm just going to go ahead with my story. One of our founders' story, some of you have heard this, and I think most of you might not have heard it, but one of our founders tells a story about growing up in New York City, and he was a good Catholic boy, and every day the nuns would tell him about Mother Teresa, who would go to the ditch in Calcutta and get the children out of the ditch. And that is the purest form of charity. And we need people like that in this world because we have a lot of kids in the ditch, and a lot of people in the ditch. He said, but I'm just not that good, and I'm not patient, and I may be ADHD. I don't know. I just can't do that. I don't have that patience. But because it's frustrating to me to see all these kids in the ditch. And so what I have to figure out what I can do with my life is to build a world where someday there are no kids in the ditch. And for us, what that is systemic change. And so that is what we're striving for, is to build systems and tools that help us as a community move to systemic change. And it is, to us, a very high form of collective impact. And that's what we're looking at. Well, why is it hard? I don't know if you can read that or not. But it's hard because here are the challenges. We have to work across boundaries, but we don't have any authority across the boundaries. We have to build trust fast, but inertia, suspicion, and bureaucracies reign. We have to share risk and benefit, but, there's a self-serving nature. We have to make it work with all stakeholders, and in some cases, not in this room, of course, but in some cases, collaboration is viewed as the last resort. We have to link resources into network, and legacy attitudes about resources remain. I really like this because, as you heard, and I'll tell you a little bit more about it. Do you like that? I heard some. This was on Sunday morning, week before last, and everybody knows who Walter Isaacson is, right? So he just said, vision without execution is simply hallucination. And I went and got my pen and wrote that down really fast because we are all over the country now helping other communities do alignment. And that's one of the reasons I said I love being in Nashville, because there's just so much happening here. But what we hear all over the place is that we're working with visioning groups. Some places, like in Florida, one in particular is a vision organization. And she said, we've been visioning for 10 years. But we haven't made it happen yet. And so that's why this really struck a chord. And what we figured out a few years ago in alignment is we have to put some structure. Well, actually, we didn't figure this out. I was taught this by some of our founders because I didn't believe it either, and then I learned it, and now I believe it, that we have to put some structure and process around how we do this because we don't, as community, have models and scaffolding for working this way. So we have to put some models out there. We have to put some structure out there. And when our communities get legs around it and understand how to do it, then they'll take off in all kinds of other creative ways. But that's the reason why we have some pretty prescriptive ways of doing things, and it's so that we can get that accountability, so that we can get that measurement, and so that we can develop models for our community. So alignment is a system designed to support the school's strategic plan by aligning for student success by aligning community resources. It's not a program. We do not do any direct service at all. And we think that's really important because we have to be the neutral backbone. It's not a parent organization. It's not a school governance model. What it is a tool set and an operating system, not a program. I don't know how that slide got messed up. We have 4 buckets of tools: principle, structure, process, technology. Don't have time to describe those to you today, but they are very, as some might say, prescriptive. And they are that way because they are models. And they're not intended to be rigid. They're just intended to be models. There are descriptions of each of these tool sets in the annual report if you want to know a little bit more about it or talk to us about it. And these are the steps that we take. We take very deliberate steps toward getting that aligned agenda or that common vision. And then the next part, taking that vision to reality. And that's the hard part. And so we have a system called the Invitation to Participate, and I just want to talk about that for 1 minute. When the alignment teams or A teams get together and design a tactical solution to something, to whatever issue a population is in need of work, they then issue, it's all about outcomes. As you saw from Melissa's slide, it's all about outcomes, long-term outcomes, and then they put in intermediate and short-term outcomes, and then tactics that can take us all along that path from the short-term, intermediate to long-term outcomes. So after they do that, then they issue an invitation to participate. And it took us a while to get this right, but invitations to participate talk about outcomes. These are the outcomes, and we want to invite everybody in this room to go on our website and to sign up and to get those invitations to participate. They come out a dozen a year now or so, right? I don't know, I'm looking at them. Because what they are intended to do is to say to you, bring us your best ideas. Bring us your best ideas on how to work together. I know, we're about out of time? Okay. Yeah, out of time. Can I just close up a second? Okay. So bring us, I have to give this one last example. I need 1 more minute because I've built up to this whole end. The invitation to participate. And what that does is it brings in unexpected opportunities. There are unexpected opportunities for everybody in this room to plug in. One example, in Rockford, Illinois, the invitation to participate was about social emotional learning in schools. How can you help us with that? One of the respondents was Alive Hospice. Alive Hospice responded to that because they wanted to bring grief counseling into the schools. But that wouldn't have been on anybody's list to call in the beginning. So there are opportunities there, many opportunities. If you look at the invitations to participate on the face, you may think, this doesn't apply to us. But look again, because it might. And we find that every single day. Okay, I'm just going to do one last thing. We have the Alignment USA Network, which is now growing. We have 9 communities. We're going to have 14 by the end of 2015. They're all creating alignment organizations based on what was done here in Nashville. I want to tell you, it's one big collaboration. That's the point. We're learning from each other all across the country. Thank you.
So
if you haven't had the pleasure of working with Charla Long in any great depth, you don't have the fear that I do of getting off of the dean's schedule today. So I am trying very hard to behave myself and keep us on our schedule. She is a woman of great determination and leads us well as our dean. So I'm Kim Carpenter Drake. I am Vice President of Center for Nonprofit Management, and I have the pleasure of asking our back office collaboration team to come up and tell us more about their project. So we're going to start with the Youth Opportunity Center, which is a collaboration that involves some other organizations but is led by Oasis and STARS. And so Roger Dinwiddie is going to lead this conversation. They're going to have about 15-20 minutes to tell us about their process, and then we're going to ask the Disability Cooperative to come up, and they have 10 to 15 minutes to tell us about their process, and then we're hoping we'll have some time for Q&A so that y'all can ask some more questions. So most of us have, I'm going to dance while they find their seats. Most of us have heard about the Youth Opportunity Center, but as this process has grown and developed over years, they have learned a lot of nuances and unexpected opportunities and challenges along the way. So what we've asked them to do for us today is to tell us more about, as the depth of a relationship like this grows, what kind of opportunities and challenges arise from that. So Roger, I'm going to toss it off to you to go ahead and coordinate that, and then I'll, if you see me stalking you yeah, I gotcha. All right.
Thanks for allowing us to be here this morning, and thanks for all y'all's interest in being a part of the process. I can tell you that STARS and Oasis Center found out really quickly together in the whole initiative how competitive we were, because we really wanted to win. Okay, so congratulations to all those of you who were winners. And we even started out our little presentation. We didn't include it today, but we started out we thought would be our winning presentation called Boss, which was Back Office Shared Services, with a wonderful tune from the boss, Bruce Springsteen, in our presentation. But it didn't help, I can tell you. Okay? And we closed with our last slide that we will save you from today, which was after we accomplished everything that we wanted to accomplish with Boss, our next goal was world peace, and we closed with a John Lennon song. So there you go. Okay? None of that helped. Before we start, I just real quickly want to say and share with you guys how much I appreciate the opportunity for us to share a little bit. This is a picture of the YOC. And the Youth Opportunity Center, most everybody's been in it at some point or the other. It would be unfair to say, without Hal Cato and my dear friend Hal, this vision would have never happened. And so kudos to Hal for coming up with this idea and allowing us to partner in the process together to develop the old Duckhead manufacturing plant, the Washington manufacturing plant on the corner of 17th and Church. We're very fortunate to be in there. Our goals when we got into building, we really wanted to be a catalyst for youth advocacy, and I'm just going to cover a couple of things real quickly. To really advise and work on youth collaborations, because STARS and Oasis Center, and many of you have had the opportunity, and we've had to work with you guys, to really foster that kind of partnership in the community for young people, to help some of those kids that Sydney just talked about, Melissa talked about, who are in the ditch, find a way to get out of the ditch, and to come along and also ensure that they're really getting their voice heard in this community. So one of the core goals of the YOC was youth advocacy and creating youth voice, and in connect and channel youth services. We were a part of we were the first Promise place in the United States of America, America's Promise. And the pictures up there on the slide, you see the strategic planning process, and many of our goals and our initiatives were developed through a strategic planning process for the Youth Opportunity Center. Obviously, to get into the Youth Opportunity Center, STARS and Oasis had been collaborating long before we moved into the building. But as it goes, everyone knows that when, it's one thing to collaborate when you live in a different building. It's another thing to collaborate when you live in the same building. It was like moving in, getting married, sort of, and it was odd. I mean, we had a lot of strange things that all our cultures did that were different. I mean, Oasis staff had dogs in the building, for heaven's sakes, okay? And we'd never shared bathrooms or anything like that before, so, it was all pretty unique to the building and to the process of growing together in our partnership. So one of the things that we did was we knew early on that we had to pick as much low-hanging fruit as possible, which began to cause us to take a look at back office shared services. How will we do IT? How will will we do phone service, et cetera, et cetera. So that was the genesis of our partnership. Whoop. And that was sort of where we started the whole business. The key business problem that we really wanted to address was taking what we had learned in our initial coming into the building through our partnership and expanding it to really grow that piece of learning in our collaborative process about IT, about phone service, about shared space, what we could help other not-for-profits learn along the way. And a part of that puzzle has also been the development of human resource supports for other not-for-profits who are small, who don't have access to a full-time HR director. So those were kind of our broad initiatives. If you will, many not-for-profits, as you well know in this community, have limited staff resources, not enough money and time and energy to pull those kind of folks together to really help do the kind of things that we wanted to do. I would be completely off base if I didn't stop and say this now. We couldn't have done this, obviously, without C&M, obviously without HCA, without Lipscomb. We couldn't have done it without our wonderful consultants from C&M and also from North Highland. We just simply couldn't have done it. We thought we knew stuff until we met the folks from North Highland, okay? And there's no other way to say it. And my goodness, what an asset and a blessing they were to us to help pull this together. Also, it would be unfair if we did not thank Kate Monahan, our consultant on our initial move to help us get to the building, who met with us on a regular basis to help plan this next level of process. So with that said, our like-missioned organizations came together and started this process, and Teresa's going to tell you a little bit about that, who is our Chief Operations Officer at STARS.
Thank you, Roger. One of the things we realized when we moved into the building, there were 9 nonprofits at that time in the building about 5.5 years ago. Now we have 7. Things have changed a little bit. But they were all youth-serving organizations that basically didn't all have human resource finance training services. So we realized that early on, that when you're a small nonprofit, you don't have the benefit of those services. So we got together and we collaborated mostly with Oasis to say, we have these tools. We're mid-sized nonprofits. So why can't we share these resources that we have in the building with other nonprofits? So North Highland, and this is the right button here, North Highland helped us create this model of what we wanted to accomplish here. And we wanted to basically accomplish a back office shared services model that we could share with other nonprofits in the community, like-minded nonprofits. And then we wanted to teach other nonprofits how to do that, because like Roger said, it was challenging to come into a building where you have different philosophies, different modes of operation. And basically we got together, we went through a project with Nissan where they came in and they had us down to the micro level talk about every finance process, every HR process, every training process that we had between the 2 agencies, and we blended those into one. So right now we have the same payroll person that does payroll for 3 different agencies, for Big Brothers Big Sisters, for STARS, and for Oasis. So she's the expert in that field. So this process has kind of helped us get to that place to where you have experts in their field that are able to go and do their jobs, what they're good at, for multiple agencies. It was not an easy path by any means, but at the end of the day, what we created was economies of scale, because we're able to have, one person doing certain functions, one person doing training, or we share our trainings in the building. We share a lot of services in the building. For instance, how many of y'all have to do the Title VI process? Okay, so Shanda and I decided that was just, we've done it so many years that you try to get one person to go to your Title VI meetings. Little things like that really make a big difference, and there are big time savings. We also improved our efficiencies by having one person trained in payroll, one person working on certain functions. So that's really what we learned from this process. We also have shared this model with other nonprofit agencies. Others have come in to learn what we've done so they can model it out in the community. So while we didn't win the Magic Award, we felt like we won for the community. And we like what we have there. It's a great, super work environment to be there. And I think we all have benefited this in many ways. And so with that, turn it back over to Roger.
And while we have won, we still wanted to win. Okay? So, let's just be honest. Okay? Yeah. So some of the accomplishments within the building, we have, as Teresa mentioned, we've really increased our back office shared services piece. But I think other things have happened. We've also expanded our work with Big Brothers Big Sisters in terms of doing finance and HR for them. We also now have picked up our consulting relationship with Boys and Girls Club, whose administrative functions are in the building, and doing HR work with them as well, which has improved. And by the way, improved help, we hope, at least from what our feedback is, have helped improve efficiencies within those organizations as well. Not only their efficiencies, but also their effectiveness, which I think is really important, not just one. A couple other things really quickly on the accomplishment side, and then I'll turn it over to Tom. We increased our promote. I think one of the things that we thought about, we said low-hanging fruit early on from the obvious things and moving in together. But one of the things that I think has been most helpful the last several years is to really increase our programmatic collaborations, because that's something that we knew we wanted always to do, and we'd had a long-term partnership with Oasis Center in terms of working together in community and schools, referrals, etc. But we really wanted to take that to the next level. So we've done that. We've done that through training initiatives that we've been involved with statewide initiatives through the School Climate Project, where Oasis staff and our staff have done what's called S3 summits across Tennessee with 27 school districts, about 150 schools that are working on improving school climate initiatives. So we've done that piece together. We've also implemented, since we were here, we've increased our availability for increased mental health services in the building. And as you can see, we now have what we're really excited about with the Oasis Art Studio, and we're an intensive outpatient treatment program, part of our agency now. And one of the things that's been so wonderful is we have been acknowledged as a really great partner by Nashville Prevention Partnership, one of our other partners in the building, because of using the art studio and the art therapy part with our treatment kids, which is really exciting. So the natural evolution of things just leads us to that point where it becomes more obvious every time we're in the building together, every day we're in the building together, we look for those chances to work together. Finally, Teresa, and she mentioned the HR piece. We've also been fortunate that the learnings that have occurred within the YOC have also transferred into other school systems across the country and local not-for-profits, in helping them deal with workplace relationship issues. Because I'm sure everybody's relationships are absolutely perfect in this room with all their colleagues and all their customers. And but if you need help, we'd love to talk to you, because it's a great opportunity to really help transfer some learnings that we've had. And I loved what Sydney said, that basically it meant we didn't know anything when we started this, and we've learned it along the way, and it's been a great asset for the community, the things that we've learned together. Last, before Tom picks up, I just want to say the big issue that Cynthia will talk about in closing is just some reduced cost savings. But I can't tell you how much fun it is to work with Tom. And Tom and I are just ridiculously old and crazy and have a blast and have a great time every day. And I can't tell you how much we appreciate the four of them who are tolerant of us, okay, would be the best way to say that, and working together. And I'm sure you'll echo that and add something smart to it, right? Okay?
Probably so. Probably so. I would say that our working relationship is at the expense of the lady sitting between us. I don't know, what am I clicking to here? All right, let's go. What's great about a story like this is that it really is one that says, and everybody lived happily ever after. And I think what we have learned along the way that was probably the most important lesson is that we really had to spend time getting to know each other. We had to figure out where our buttons were. We had to figure out what are those things you didn't say on certain days. We had to figure out what those looks were and what they meant. We had to figure out, we did a little change modeling piece with our staff last week, and we had to figure out who were those people that were conservators. Those people that said, we ain't changing. And who were those people that were the innovators and said, well, why not? And then where are those pragmatists in the middle? And what we have is a conglomeration on our leadership team here is people who fall in all of those categories. And what we learned is that the devil is definitely in the details in this work. Now, I know that doesn't sound like that's even earth-shattering, but let me tell you what you forget when you start this journey. You forget the difference between urgency and hurry. There was an urgency for us because we needed to save money. We found out that we were all of a sudden living in a building that cost us more money to operate. And I don't know that they had necessarily, I mean, I walked into the process way down the road, so I missed all the fun sticky Post-it notes and all that stuff. But quickly was able to be a part of a team that said, we got to meet regularly. We have to come back and talk. We've got to ask questions. I could give you illustrations of things in hiring an IT guy. We thought that would work out fine. Well, what we came to find out is that what we asked the IT guy to do and what STARS asked the IT guy to do were very different. We were ready to string him up outside, and they were totally in love with him. And when we structurally broke that down, what we found out is that they had a dedicated person on their staff that did the low-level IT functions. We didn't. So I was calling because my printer broke. They were calling because the server went down. Different functions. But nobody had taken the time to say, wait a minute, let's talk about that. So we are now going back and looking at all the contracts we do. We sat in a meeting, about 10 of us who looked like détente yesterday when we were looking at a new IT provider. I'm not sure that we don't have a pretty good model that could be used on a national level too, maybe in Washington. Has something to do with talking and listening, I don't know. But that was probably the biggest lesson that we learned. So what we had to do is we had to really talk about what our cultures were like. We had to talk about that. I had a lot of folks that operated on forgiveness rather than permission. We had to talk about what it's like to work in community functions versus working almost exclusively in schools. We had to talk about who gets to use the bathrooms for what. Because see, when you do a drug rehab program, you got to do drug testing. And so instead of people being angry, people began to talk about all those functions. We began to talk about what did we want for safety? What did safety mean to you? What did it mean to us? And so what we did is we all became really good friends because we were sharing some of those basic fundamental details that absolutely make the process work. And guess what? It's not an event. And it's just kind of like I told my son, we said, Dad, what's the secret to a good marriage? I said, you work at it every single day. And that's exactly what this has become for us. And we don't get it right. And yeah, we're still irritated. I'm sure there's times when Roger would rather I not make comments that I make. But I know the ladies all wish Roger and I didn't make any of the comments we make. But other than that, it's been one of those things that says, okay, what is the end goals? And this was the last comment I'll make to you. It wasn't about either one of us trying to convince the other that our practice was better than theirs. It was about saying, what is it that we want to mutually accomplish here? And what we found out is that that was the same answer. And once you get to that place, then you can carve a journey out that works very, very well together. And you take from each other the pieces that work, and then you can create some hybrids. And so it really becomes a very genuine process. But what I would say to you is, go in with the understanding that you're not going to do this and then put it down. You're going to do this from this point on. And that's what we do. That's what we do.
The one that starts your car.
So as we wrap up here, you can look and see, why do this? One of the reasons to do this is to save money, because the more money you can save on facility costs and back office costs is money that you now can put into programs. And so this is now money that can be used for serving kids. So over the 5 years that STARS and Oasis has been in the building together, through our savings and occupancy costs, and our savings generated through back office, we have saved about $735,000. That is a 24% reduction of cost for occupancy and back office. We have saved that money through shared IT services, through shared reception services, through shared janitorial services. We have saved that money through contracting out finance and HR services to other nonprofits in the building, so they didn't have to necessarily hire more people in, through sharing our payroll, through sharing our AP. So there's been lots of things that we have done to maximize that. And one of the things we have looked at really on back office services is maximizing everybody's potential. A lot of small nonprofits at times need a very high-level accounting or HR person, but they don't necessarily need that person 40 hours a week. So what we have done is we've been able to go in and get an AP person to do the AP function, and then get a higher-level person to do those grant managements and other things that require a different set of eyes. And so that has helped us maximize everybody's potential on this. And so that is how we've been able to generate these savings. And so it's been a great fit for us. When you look at these numbers of savings, this is STARS and Oasis. The customers that we serve also have had savings, but those aren't reflected here because those are their savings. This is what we have saved together.
So hit that next slide. And I think, Kim, you want us to stop now? Our Q&A now.
We'll bring up the next group and
Very
then we'll
good.
do a combined
Okay.
Q&A.
So thanks, y'all. That's where we are today
Great.
with
So-
us, okay?
Don't go anywhere, guys. Stay, yep, please. As long, I mean, I don't want you to feel like everybody's watching you, but I'm going to ask Amanda and Carol to join us up here, and they are going to tell us about their experiences with the Disability Co-op and the Tennessee Disability Coalition and Autism Tennessee, which is one of the partners in that collaboration. And then we will come back to the full panel to open Q&A. So thank you all for staying up here while we hear them share their thoughts with us. And Joanne, I think Roger might have some unresolved issues with the award of the prize last year. I just, if anyone works in counseling, you might want to have a chat with Matthew. So, I love a competitive man. So I'm going to give you all a few minutes to share your thoughts and some of the differences in that different type of collaboration. Then we'll come back with the Q&A.
Great, we'll be happy to do that. We're delighted to be here. Great to be there with our friends. And we've never competed for the award, darn. And when Cindy said, as a pioneer, that you are somebody who doesn't know what you're doing, I will tell you that we have had a collaboration going on back office and on program for over 17 years now. And when you all came up, Amanda looked at me and said, we should have brought more members of the family. I was like, ooh, and maybe done a PowerPoint. But there you go. But we have what we call a disability cooperative, but I want to give you a little bit of history, and then I think Amanda's going to talk a little bit about sort of where we are now, because we have a very long 17-year history, and it was really born, we have various layers, I would say, of collaborative practice and of working on collective impact. And Melissa said earlier that, she said, oh, look, somebody has a name for it. We didn't know it had a name. It was born out of necessity for us. And so we have had a really good time. I work with a group called the Tennessee Disability Coalition, and it is itself a collaborative. 6 agencies in about 1986 got together and said, how do we develop some collective impact? Not in those words. And, we're all working together. Some of us on specific disabilities, some of us on other kinds of things, but there's got to be a way that we can have more impact and make Tennessee a better place for people with disabilities. And so that started with 6. We're now over 40 agencies big. We have a process that we use to develop an agenda, do those kinds of things, and move forward. And so that's been a really, really important part of what we do. But in the early days, we had 1 staff person, and then we had 2 staff people, and then we had 3. And then we needed office space. And it was like, ooh, what are we going to do? Well, there was a Center for Independent Living that had 2 staff people, and they needed office space. What were they going to do? There was an Autism Society of Middle Tennessee that had no staff, had parent volunteers, needed a place other than a kitchen table to begin to work at. And we knew each other. And we said, wow, okay. We all have a need. What are we going to do? And we set about to look at our resources. And the Center for Independent Living had a phone system. Woo-hoo. We didn't. Somebody else, had a lease for a copier. Okay, we're in. And each of us took a risk. The coalition rented more space than we could afford. And agencies came with us. We started out with 4 agencies in a little tiny space. The Autism Society was in a closet, as I recall.
Yes. That's what I heard.
And so we really said, we can do this together. So we were all so tiny and immature, frankly, that we didn't have to worry too much about culture clash, because we just have kind of grown up together. We just started out saying, okay, here we go. What are we going to do? And we spent a lot of time together. And interestingly enough, the first thing that we were able to do was to get a Frist Foundation grant for about $10,000 in 1997 that gave us, frankly, the down payment for the rent. That gave us, for the first time, a shared receptionist. Nobody had any clerical staff. We were all program staff. We were all out there in the street trying to do what we could do. And it was like, well, this is like the coolest thing ever, you know? We actually had a fax machine we shared, we had a copier we shared, we had one, if you're as old as I am, dial-up phone connection. So you would get on, download your email, and then shout, "I'm done," so that the next person could sign up, download their email. That's the way it was. So when people say, okay, good, somebody else is old enough to remember that, yay. Amanda's not. But that's how you share. And when people talk about it being a marriage, when you talk about building trust, when you talk about putting your egos aside, that's all of what that is. You know, you have to say we have a shared need, and it is about what we can do together and for each other. We spend a lot of time about each according to his means. We have these conversations all the time. What can you do? What can you afford? How can we do that together? And the really most fascinating thing to me is that in the first 5 years, we grew from agencies with 1 staff person, 2 staff people, 3 staff people, and no staff people, to agencies that had 10 people, 12 people, 15 people, and their first full-time director, which was Amanda. And I will tell you that growth had everything to do with not just the shared back office functions, sharing the payroll and sharing the bookkeepers and sharing the receptionist and sharing a conference room. Now that was really cool. We actually had a conference room we could use. But it really was about doing that together and the kind of energy and synergy that gave you. The cost savings, absolutely. 1 dial-up phone connection, not so bad. But, you know, beyond that, the other money that we can spend on program really was about how we could share and grow together because we were sharing. And I'm going to turn it over to you to talk a little bit about the practical aspects.
Yeah. So I just want to share our experience. The Autism Society of Middle Tennessee, we have now rebranded, and we are Autism Tennessee. And I have a hard time talking about us in the past and saying Autism Tennessee. So I'm going to go back and forth, so bear with me on that. But, you know, Carol mentioned a little bit about our history. Our organization literally started in a kitchen with a group of moms that wanted to help families affected by autism. Thankfully, one of those moms met Carol somewhere and formed a relationship, and the coalition was kind enough to give us that free closet, which is a closet. It was literally a closet, but it was free office space that they were willing to give this small organization just because they saw the benefit to the community. There was no other win in it for them. And so that helped us get our feet on the ground. We were able to get a United Way grant. We were able to start paying the moms a part-time salary. And then we were able to just continue to grow and build our capacity from that, thanks to the generosity of the coalition and then being a part of that co-op. So the coalition continued to subsidize our rent until 5 years ago. 5 years ago was the first time we started paying what we actually should have been paying in rent, which is a tremendous blessing to our organization. And in 2006, the organization was able to hire their first full-time executive director, which, as all of you know, is the best way to build the capacity of an organization is to have someone there full-time working on that. So some of the benefits to us as an organization, it's not just that cost and time savings. Yes, it is much cheaper to share a copy machine, and it saves me a lot of time when I'm not the one that has to deal with it when it breaks down. Sorry, Carol. But it's all these intangibles that have been the biggest benefit to Autism Tennessee. When I was first hired, I cannot imagine being the first executive director of an organization and being in a building by myself when the rest of my staff are part-time and they're only there about 5 hours a day, if that. So to be in a space where not only did you have the energy of other people, but I wasn't the only one still there at 5 o'clock. There's some safety to that, quite frankly, in some of the areas where we have lived together. But it's also being able to walk down the hall when I have an HR question. The board tells me I get paid holidays. Great. What are those? Does anybody have a list of what those holidays are? To be able to share the HR manuals, the budget templates, all of those things that as a small organization we didn't have and isn't really worthy of that C&M phone call. C&M is obviously a tremendous resource to us, and as the organization grew and I made more contacts, there are more and more people that I could have called for those types of support. But to be able to walk down the hall to Carol and say, okay, I need some help with some board dynamics, and to sit down in her office and close the door and have a really honest conversation with this amazing mentor who was willing to say, I'm going to take my time on this organization today because I see the benefit for the community. There was nothing in it for Carol or the coalition. So I think it's that mentoring. There is so much incidental learning that happens in the hallways, in the conference rooms when we find ourselves sitting there eating lunch. All that just natural passing has created more tighter relationships that make those program collaborations feel more natural. And there is just so much incidental learning that's really hard to describe. But we have been able to partner not only on that back office, but now on some programs. It is very wonderful to have someone come to the building who has a child with autism, who needs the support of Autism Tennessee. We can take them downstairs to STEP, support and training for exceptional parents, because they need help with their IEP at school. We can bring them back upstairs and connect them to the Center for Independent Living because they need help with some housing issues. To be able to say, this is Joey, and he's going to help you next, is so wonderful for the people that we serve as well. So I guess I'll just say what the coalition has done through this co-op is help so many smaller organizations build their capacity to continue to serve the community. And now we're in a place where we are mentoring our sister chapters in East and West Tennessee. So the risk that they took on a group of moms in 1998 or whenever that was, is now impacting families affected by autism all across the state.
And so for us, it really is about, how do you make sure that you're going to have an impact in the community and give people the ability to do that themselves. And I guess that partly because we come from an empowerment model for people with disabilities, it's really easy to think about that in terms of agencies as well. And, you all talked about how you were 9 and now you're 7. And I mean, things do change. So we started out with 4 organizations, and we have had as many as 7, and we have had organizations leave, and some of them have left because they grew and got too big and there just wasn't a place there anymore. And we have had organizations where the fit just wasn't there. So they came for a while and then it was like, there was, there were other kinds of opportunities. And you've got to be okay with all of that. Do you know, it ebbs and flows, and that makes a great deal of sense. But we've also been able to incubate new organizations because, again, you're there with a lot of partners and leaders who can help each other to make things happen. So 17 years, still going strong. Not every day is a great day. We sometimes want to kill the IT person, we sometimes, but, and there have been organizations that shared the back office finance work, and then who would go off on their own and not, so there's different models even within our co-op about what services people use, but it's a very strong model. Doing that together is always better than doing it alone, is what we say.
Great, thank you. I think that's a common theme we've heard today, is doing it together is almost always better than doing it alone. So that's a great transition. So we have some time set aside for Q&A, for questions for any of the members of either of these two groups. So we'd love to take your questions. Mary, I bet we can hear you.
A question about culture. Can you identify anything that you feel like, would you?
I don't think, there it is.
Yep.
Can you identify anything that your sub-organization has absorbed in terms of culture that from someone else in the collaborative that you feel has really been a game changer for you? some brilliant idea, some spark? Is there anything like that that would be a benefit to a collaboration that you haven't spoken about so far?
Can y'all think of anything?
Wow.
It's a great question, Mary.
Can we get back to her now?
Can we take a day to get back to you?
What's your email address?
That's a really good question. Got to ponder that for a minute.
Well,
Here we go.
I'll just say Autism Tennessee has never known any different. And so I think we can credit the co-op and the coalition for giving us the culture of collaboration that we have. So although it hasn't been a major change, it was the base from which we built.
And I will say that one of the things that we've really learned from each other over time in our community is about accessibility. We've had a number of organizations where the majority, if not all, of the staff people are people with disabilities of one variety or another, be it having a visual impairment or blindness, deafness, folks who use wheelchairs, and not every organization knows all about that. You don't really know about Braille etiquette if you're in the Autism Society. Do you know? But we have really learned from each other, and we're all better at what we do across disability, I think, because of the culture in the co-op.
I did think of one thing. We had, when we first moved into the building, just difficulty having meetings at our individual agencies and collectively. So we really worked on that over the last 5 years, and we've shared that with other agencies, but basically, meetings were not functional at most of the agencies, if that resonates with any of you, where you're not talking about program in your meeting, you're talking about what's not working in your agency. So we saw that as a common theme, so we began to work on that, and we have the same coach that we use between STARS and OASIS that this helped us both, and we work with a lot of the other agencies in the building, so they're not focused on things that are, I would say, unimportant, things that they're spending their time now working on, talking about how they can help the community, not how they can't work with their coworker. So I would say that's probably one of the biggest things we've really realized in the building is how to work on purpose. We've really been intentional about that, and it's been important to us that we come to a meeting and we talk about what we need to talk about, and we leave. And if we have relationship issues, we deal with those, and that's been a big change that we've seen in many of the agencies in the building.
Other questions?
Hi, my name is Rebecca. I'm from the Tennessee Charter School Center, and I'm wondering if either of your organizations have considered merging and forming a new organization. I mean, at what point is the choice about maintaining this collaborative or even becoming more efficient? Now, obviously, your boards and your missions are different and distinct, but as I'm listening to this, it almost seems like the natural thing is to become this big conglomerate. And I'm just wondering if you've had those questions and how you've resolved them.
Yeah, we can.
All right, points for asking the hard question.
Yeah. And we have not within our cooperative. And I think that it is because of some very distinct missions of organizations. I mean, Autism Tennessee is all about autism. The Brain Injury Association of Tennessee is all about brain injury. And so you've got boards of directors who probably would not consider a merger because they really are a part of that organization because of a dedication to that particular cause. They care deeply as well about the broader, making special education work for all kids, right? But it really is about brain injury, or it's about autism, or it's about, assistive technology, for example. And so you might share a broader public policy agenda, which is what the coalition works on, as a part of your mission, but it's certainly not the whole thing. So we really haven't looked at distinct mergers. As a matter of fact, we have helped to incubate, for example, the Mental Health Consumers Association, because they are all folks who experience mental illness and wanted to have an organization of their own. So in many ways, we're just trying to provide a safe place for folks to bring their individual mission and to where it intersects with a broader mission.
for us, our partnership, the collaboration actually started as the result of a merger that didn't happen. And so we went through the process. We were funded by I've forgotten what the title of the group was, but there was a fund for collaboration that actually funded a strategic planning process and conversations between our boards, between STAR's board and OASIS's board. Kate Monahan was involved in a process eventually, and I would just say the first thing to your question is, if that question is on the table for someone, I know of no one better than Kate to help answer that question. And her work with us through mergers that we've had with other organizations has been completely beneficial. We couldn't have done it without her. But with OASIS and STARS, the merger did not occur because our boards of directors felt like that was not the right timing for that. But the answer to it was not to give up. The answer was to continue looking for opportunities to work collaboratively together. And as a result of that relationship with OASIS and STARS, through the merger that didn't happen, we ended up with the Youth Opportunity Center. So I think that continuum, if you will, from strategic alliances and partnerships to mergers and whatnot is one to really carefully consider. What's right, what may appear to be obvious and right may not in fact be. One of the things that we found out, and that goes to the next level of question, we have a YOC board that oversees just our basic bylaws about the building, our operations. They don't meet frequently, a couple times a year, which reminds me we need to get a meeting. And that group, though, decided not to form a not-for-profit, not to create an LLC or create something else for another entity in Nashville, because Nashville seems to have an abundance of 501c3s, okay? So it was not to start a new entity, but to continue to work under our existing structures with our collaborative partnership, which leads to one thing. We did a thorough analysis of insurance costs, what we thought might result in savings from merger, and at the end of the day, it was going to cost us more money to merge than not to merge, which was an interesting phenomenon. So that was a fascinating finding from all of our brokers and insurance folks as well that really helped us make some strategic decisions about that. Now that's just our experience, okay?
So we have time for one more question. I think David, oh, I'm sorry, Tom.
Let me just
Shout out for me, Tom. I couldn't see you down
All
there.
right, I'm as tall as I get. I'm sorry. Let me. You know, that's a great question, because when I came on board, that's the question I went and asked Roger. I said, I'm a little in a quandary here. I'm thrilled to be here, glad to have the job, love doing the work, glad to continue working with families and children. But why didn't you guys merge? And so we talked about it, and he gave me the answer he gave you all today, and we talked to Bill about it. But here's what's kind of become a revelation to me as we've worked together. We are actually stronger the way we are now, because we have fairly distinctive operating styles in terms of how we attack problems. We also have the idea of inside systems and outside systems. And the way our teams work, you really don't want to get caught between us. And we know that. That's the power in the work we do, because we work structurally inside sometimes, and lots of OASIS work is structurally outside. And so when you evaluate a question like that, you have to be careful not to stop short with a single lens. If you had used simply the financial lens, other than the healthcare issue, yeah, it would have made sense. Replication of services, how many are doing this or that? But what would you have given up? What would have been the unintended consequence of making that decision? And I think what you found is that you couldn't have kept both of those structural initiatives, that approach to the work, you couldn't have kept it as strong if you'd put it under one heading as it is right now. And I think that's one of the reasons Roger and I communicate on a weekly basis about a lot of different things. And we talk about, we have a huge initiative right now that we're working with the school district on through Annenberg for a project called Passages. And it's going to touch a lot of things in this community. And it is our distinct operating styles and approaches to the work that are going to bring the power. So be really careful when you answer that you don't find that easy portal and evaluate it through a single lens. Get a lot of voices in the room that will cause you to think about the work real differently. And that would be sort of an addendum to that answer.
I'm Kathy Self, President and CEO of Baptist Healing Trust. And we have been honored, blessed, privileged, humbled beat up, beat down, exhilarated over the past couple of years as we have participated in a cross-sector partnership. If you go back to some of those notes you heard from our dean about collective impact, some of those very things came to light after that very first conversation on that stormy afternoon in a downtown garage. We are going to welcome this afternoon distinguished panelists. I'll start at this end. We have Kristen Keeley-Dinger, who is going to represent and be the voice of Baptist Healing Trust this afternoon. Sandy Dimick, well, no, that's not Sandy, that's George. George Brandes, who is currently with Jackson Hewitt, but was formerly with the state-based Exchange Planning Initiative. Code for, for what?
Contingency planning.
For contingency planning. I love that. I love that. I knew there had to be a whole nother phrase to that. We've got Sandy Dimick with Family and Children's Services, and we have Nikki Viverette, who is with Tennessee Primary Care Association. All of them have had a piece and a part of an initiative that, for lack of a better title, we ended up calling Get Covered Tennessee. And so I just want to start off by asking the panel, since this is interactive, and this will be for Kristen and for George, if the two of you would start by just explaining to us what is and has been Get Covered Tennessee, and how is it that the state came to a private entity to begin with to even start this conversation.
Do you want me to start, George? Okay. I figured as much. So I'm Kristen, as Kathy said, and I'm actually filling in today for Beth Usselton, who is actually our program director for the Get Covered Tennessee initiative. She is out on maternity leave right now. So I will do my best to fill her shoes. Although she was really the one that was the linchpin, at least for the foundation, in coordinating this effort. So as Kathy mentioned, it all started with some conversations in a parking garage, I think after a Rotary meeting, but we won't go any further than that, giving away too many confidential details. But it did start as a public-private partnership between the foundation and the state of Tennessee, and George is filling a couple of different roles for us here today, but he was part of the state-based planning exchange initiative at the time, and the hope is that using this public-private partnership vehicle, that we would be able to leverage funds and resources to educate the public about their new options under the marketplace, and provide outreach and enrollment assistance to vulnerable Tennesseans who would now be eligible for coverage through the new options. So the state played definitely a role with getting the foundation involved, and we certainly, I guess, appreciate that.
You're welcome.
When the state decided to forego the state-based exchange, as Kathy said, things changed and we adapted. We learned how to be flexible through this process, and we continued forward with a partnership between businesses, including insurance agents, insurers, hospitals, the for-profit sector, as well as government, although it became more locally based, particularly with the local government here in Nashville and in Memphis. We had multiple nonprofit partners that have helped us along the way, including some of the folks in this room and our friends at Family and Children's Services and TPCA, who came in fairly early on in the effort to help us coordinate this initiative as well. So that's a little bit about how it came to be, and I'll let George talk about the state's role as well as sort of the role of the private sector in helping the overall mission.
So I can just share with you one sort of insight that won't surprise you, right? There's a reason we called it the Insurance Exchange Planning Initiative, and there's a reason we talked about contingency planning for health reform, or for federal healthcare reform. We had a political problem, right? With the governor and the legislature were in an impossible position, and the
just ignore me.
Oh, sorry. The vitriol around the ACA at the time in 2011 and 12 was really problematic, and so we turned to to Baptist Healing Trust because they were an organization that had a lot of legitimacy in the community and who had deep ties with a lot of the relevant stakeholders. And by working with them, we were able to get things done we would not have been able to get done as agents of the state. And so that was one problem that we were able to solve. By extension, we dissolved the Insurance Exchange Planning Initiative on December 10th, 2012. Not that I'm counting, but we didn't let go of that. We hadn't let go of that idea of working with non-government entities to try to get more done than we could get done given the political reality in Tennessee. And so that's what led me to move to the tax prep industry. Was in a similar way from working with Baptist Trust. We were working with tax prep entities around the country to try to get them involved in enrolling people because we wanted to find, we knew the Navigator funding was going to be pretty anemic, and or at least we were worried about that. We wanted to find an industry that could build a business case out of enrolling people in the ACA. And in spite of all the things you can say about the tax prep industry, they were the one industry we could find who really could do that. And so my partner Brian and I went on to do that work with them and set up a program to enroll people around the country through Jackson Hewitt, and some of the other tax preparation companies followed suit. So I guess the takeaway is that it was born of necessity that we did these kinds of partnerships and solved a really intractable problem. And I hope I think it's something that other states are doing as well, and it shows how unimportant state agents are and how important people in the community are.
That's great. Thank you. Nikki, Sandy, how did you all come to be a part of this merry band?
With a little help from our friends. How's that? Is this on? Can you hear me okay? The mayor's office contacted Family and Children's Service. We had a lot of good relationships with other agencies in the community, and they wanted one agency to help coordinate all the efforts. We did have at least a limited number of people doing enrollment, but we wanted to make sure that we weren't stepping all over each other and duplicating efforts. In addition to that, there was a lot of misinformation out there. So we wanted to make sure that we shared information, we got the right message out, but also as we ran into difficulties that we were sharing the solutions to get through the process with each other so that everyone wasn't spending a lot of time going to CMS and asking the same questions over and over. We were sharing that information to save time so that we could be out there actually enrolling people, which is what we wanted to get done.
Yeah, and good morning. Just to add to what Sandy said, with the healthcare law, there was a lot of information, a lot of incorrect information, and still is, though it was worse in the beginning. So I think the role that Navigator entities and CAC entities and BHT and other partners in the coalition have played is ensuring that correct information is getting out to all partners, whether that's the public or that's consumers or it's the state. Ensuring that information is correct and getting to them. With Tennessee Primary Care Association, our primary work is with federally qualified health centers, and I see some in the room, very glad about that. So the information that they were feeding to us was super important because they were statewide. And so that statewide perspective, experience, network, we were able to then feed to our coalition or our teammates, our partners in Nashville, and then they could feed to their networks. We focused on mostly sharing of, like Sandy said, when you get an answer from CMS, you need to share it because basically every case is really different, and you may have a situation that no one else is going to have for the rest of the year, but it's going to come up again. So anytime you can get that information and share it, super important. From what we learned from our FQHCs, we also developed a training, and that training was then shared with other people too, because once you develop a PowerPoint, you don't need to keep doing it over and over again. So we have different iterations of the PowerPoint and training, but once you develop a curriculum, sharing that with others is super important because you don't want to have to continue to create the wheel, recreate the wheel. And as George mentioned, Navigator funding and other funding for assisters is limited and more limited next year. So having people who can access the information and share that information is really important to ensure people across the state are getting the help they need.
There are 2 or 3 things that I've heard you say, and I'm going to throw some curveballs. We know we've talked a little bit about some questions we might discuss, but I'm hearing you talk about avoiding duplication, getting the right messaging out, and having an integrated approach. You all are talking about making an impact and being involved in advocacy. I'm wondering if one of you would be willing to respond to and talk about, was that impact strictly one way? Did you see influence going back to other players in the field that were part of this initiative to begin with? How did that influence flow as this began to evolve and transition?
I can speak a little bit to that. I think I have notes on that actually.
Oh.
So I mentioned that we work primarily with the federally qualified health centers that serve both urban and rural areas. So with that being a unique network across the state, we were able to glean all kinds of information from our network in the FQHCs. Whenever you have rural or urban, you have different sets of strengths and obstacles. And so then we were able to feed that information to our network, whether it be volunteers or Get Covered Tennessee or Get Covered Nashville Coalition, other sisters across the state as well. And then in turn, when they heard something that was a unique case, a new policy, a workaround, which there are many of them because we need them, we would then feed that to our FQHCs. So that was a very tangible flow of knowledge that was necessary. That's mostly our unique experience, but I know others have it too.
Yes. I agree with that 100%.
I will say, because I don't know if George will toot his own horn, but Jackson Hewitt was putting out a tremendous amount of really great research around the tax policy implications of the ACA and why it made sense to extend the enrollment period to match up with when folks were doing their taxes and the tax deadline. And if you look at the result of what ended up happening and the fact that we did get some extensions and the fact that the majority of the enrollments occurred towards the end of open enrollment and in the extension period, the advocacy that they were able to do really benefited all of us. I don't know if you all would concur with that, but I appreciated
absolutely.
that we were all working towards a common goal.
Yes, I mean, just to give you an example, the very last day of open enrollment, we had 400 people show up to the downtown library to enroll. And if you heard, the system was completely overblown with people trying to enroll. It was shutting down on us. If we had not had that extension, it was the same concept as when you go to vote. The polls close at 7, but if you're in line before 7, you still get to vote. And it was the same concept. They had to prove that they at least tried to show up and enroll that day or tried to call in. But that gave us 2 extra weeks to get people through the system, which was very helpful. So thank you for that.
I gave Kristen money to say that. I won't tell you how much. I can maybe just add that I think that Kristen may be exaggerating our contributions to that policy change. I think, but all the same, appreciated. Certainly, we have tried to use, and continue to use Jackson Hewitt as a platform for. And those of you who don't know Jackson Hewitt, it's a tax preparation company with about 7,000 locations in all 50 states and about 30,000 tax preparers during the tax season. And we're smaller than H&R Block, but bigger than everybody else. We certainly try to use that as a platform for advocating for policy changes and corrections that we think are important for consumers, and we can speak from the perspective of trying to protect our customers as taxpayers, which is a useful thing. And I would maybe just add that some of you may know Brian or me and know that we're not afraid to not make friends in the administration and with progressive groups, but we're also not afraid to make enemies with non-progressives. I think it's a comfortable position to be in as long as you're willing to eat alone. But I think
we'll eat lunch with you today, George.
Thank you. But I guess what I'm getting at is that we actually had some surprising successes by basically publicly shaming the administration into doing things. But just one example is the unbanked issue, and the insurance companies. We knew from our time at the state that issuers in Tennessee and elsewhere plan to require that in order to pay your premiums, you had to do a direct bank transfer right through the ACH, automatic clearinghouse, which means you had to have a bank account to pay your premiums, which means you couldn't get your tax credit without paying your premiums. So tax credit, bank account, must have. Except we did a little research with John Graves at Vanderbilt University and found that 1 in 4 likely tax credit eligible uninsured consumers doesn't have a bank account. So we published a little paper and called all our friends at the Wall Street Journal and elsewhere, and miraculously 3 weeks later, HHS issued a correction requiring insurance companies to accept prepaid debit cards. I mean, hell, they even required them to accept cash, which is not what we asked for. But and the insurance companies moaned, but they didn't. The world did not stop spinning, and it was so unambiguously good for the people that the ACA is supposed to help. We couldn't believe that HHS hadn't already fixed that. So I think I guess what I'm getting at is that we can do that, and that was fun, and we had some success. But you guys and navigators, CACs, and progressives around the country and in local communities, you guys are the ones that you are the constituency of this administration and Health and Human Services. And if you see things that you think ought to be changed, you should not be afraid to raise Cain about it and to tell HHS that they're being dunderheads and they ought to fix this. Because I can tell you, they make mistakes. They really do. I'm not saying they're not good people and they're not trying hard. They have an enormous task and they have very limited resources. And I think it would be wonderful in the future to see advocates not necessarily towing the party line and not afraid to raise a stink over things when they see things that aren't working.
We're going to work on your passion in just a little while. I'll meet you outside. We'll work on that just a bit. You're touching on something, though, that I think is important. If any of us in the room would ever conceive of, we certainly had never thought as a private foundation about the possibility of entering into a contract with the state of Tennessee, and that's exactly what we did. That was the first step that we took in moving forward to this. And one of the things that we struggled with as we wrestled in those first earliest days was our value sets. We wanted to ensure that we were going to be keeping company with folks that had the clear shared vision and values that our board certainly would be comfortable with and that we as the staff could wrestle a little bit with. I'm going to ask this of the whole panel. Did you experience divergent values? And if you did, how did those differences get resolved?
I think that starting out, it was a little bit different because everyone had their own personal goals and maybe even some goals set for them as far as, how many people they were going to help, how many people they were going to enroll. And so at first, I think the collaboration was a little bit scary because they thought, well, what if they're going to take some of my referrals, or what if they're going to count my people as theirs? And it didn't take long for them to understand we're there to help and we're there as support. And we were starting, after a while, we would get someone from an FQHC who's, somebody was out on maternity leave, and all of a sudden she had a lot of people in her clinic to enroll and she needed some help, and so she called us, and we were always there. We could get somebody over there to help out. And that became clear pretty quickly, and that was very helpful. And that's probably just the unknown starting out. It's not understanding how we were going to all work together.
Yeah, and I'll say, for the most part, I think that the people doing this work in the coalition have shared values. I think the difference might come in different organizational restrictions, different experience, different skills, different perspectives. But I think for the most part, the coalition and partnerships that we have doing this work have worked to make sure that we respect each other's organizational boundaries. For example, navigator entities who are funded by the federal government to do enrollment assistance have a few more restrictions than other entities might have. So working to make sure that everybody's boundaries were respected, but also work to make sure that when there were divergent perspectives or knowledge, that a compromise was reached. And not just a compromise, but a compromise that was considered the best thing for the public or for the coalition. And I think that was something that we've seen several times happen.
And I'll just say from more of the macro 30,000 foot view, because we also convene a statewide advisory council that has representatives from government, from for-profit, and from non-for-profit industry. And, you know, one of the things that we really had to wrestle with is that there were competing values in terms of, are we doing this to make a profit? Are we doing this because we feel like it's in the best interest of the vulnerable people of Middle Tennessee? And there were some conflicts around, you know, with agents and brokers is an interesting industry to talk about, because I think there was some, at least, perception at the beginning of this that the navigators or the CACs might take away from their business. And really the value of us working together is that we got to build those relationships with those groups and come to the understanding of there's so much need and so little funding for nonprofit partners to do navigation and assistance, that really it's an all hands on deck type of thing. And we needed the agents and brokers to be helping people figure out their options. And we needed the tax prep folks to be helping people figure out what their options were. That the small amount of, I think, less than 100 federally funded folks throughout the state weren't going to be able, at 2 to 3 hours per enrollment, meet the overwhelming need of uninsured residents of our state. So having those different industries, albeit we were all there for slightly different reasons, the end result is that more people got enrolled, which is the ultimate goal, which I think we just had to keep reminding ourselves that that's why we were at the table. And I do remember when Brian and George, who were at the state, went to Jackson Hewitt, told me they were going to go work for a tax prep company. And my initial reaction was, really? Sellouts? Yes. You know, I'm a social worker, so, you know, I've heard what I've heard about that industry. And, but once I really talked through that with them and understood their reason for doing that and the difference that they could make within the for-profit industry, I understood that there were reasons why we all need to think outside, well, not even think outside the box, but just recognize that maybe unusual partnerships are what is needed in very limited resource environments. So I deeply appreciate that George and Brian stayed at the table. They did the work that really had a huge impact on a national level, frankly, with changing some policies that George has so adequately called dunderheads made at the federal level. So we do appreciate that, and I guess that would be my comment about this, is just, you know, you have to be creative and innovative with your partners.
Fair enough. I'm going to ask one last question, and then we'll open it up for questions from our community here. We've read, especially when we look at cross-sector partnerships, collective impact, collaborations, that there are a number of roadblocks that can get in the way. Time constraints, hidden agendas, limited communication, not being able to all be in the same room at the same time. How did you experience overcoming some of those roadblocks as this process has evolved?
Well, one of the biggest hurdles to me was just simply misinformation. There was so much misinformation out in the community. Even with, we had a really good, we had a lot of brokers, I guess, that were really good and understood it. But occasionally we would get a phone call from one, and they would say something like, well, you know, the people in the gap are those people from 100% of the federal poverty limit to 138%, which wasn't accurate. It was people who are less than that. They didn't even understand, you know, who the people in the Medicaid gap are in our state, because we didn't do Medicaid expansion. So a lot that we ended up having to do that we didn't expect was just simple education across the board. We even had a broker who we found out at the end of open enrollment told someone that they didn't want to go through the healthcare.gov site because what would happen is at the end of the year they would have to pay back all of their tax credits, all of their cost share reduction, which is where their deductible goes from $5,000 down to maybe nothing. And so they're thinking, I'm going to have to pay $5,000 back at the end of the year. And the broker told her that, you know, if she didn't do that, that they could put a lien on her house, they could take everything in her checking and savings account. And so we were just floored, but this is what people were out in the community telling people. So we had a lot of education to do, and a lot of kind of, you know, going back and undoing a lot of things. And then, of course, the person is left with this sense of, okay, well, this person told me one thing, this person over here tells me something completely different. Who do I believe? So we felt like, you know, we had to really, you know, prove to people we're not in it for us. We're here to help you. We're not going to tell you to pick this plan because it makes us, you know, maybe more money. We're looking out for your best interest and what's best for you and your circumstances. So it was a huge issue to tackle.
I think, excuse me, two of the major roadblocks that we saw, when you said time constraints, I was like, yes. So with the nature of the law, it's a big law and it's new, which means that there are, to benefit the people who it serves, there are changes. So there were many of those changes, and with our goal being a goal of communication and information sharing, we were often sharing new information every day. But we didn't always have time to read the latest policy, read the latest email from Families USA or CMS, because we had people sitting in front of us that we knew that was the primary goal of our work, was to serve the people who came to us, to enroll them and give them fair and impartial information. And that became an obstacle at different times. End of open enrollment was crazy. So I would think time constraint, which happened, I know we all understand that, time constraints. The other thing I would say is communication. We as a coalition work very hard to communicate with each other, but communication breaks down across a room and across a wall and certainly across the state. So there were times when, due to time constraints, the communication could not happen in the way that it needed to get information to people, whether it's the public, fellow partners, or the state. And those were obstacles that we had to deal with. And some of that just meant some of the things that we had to do just had to go by the wayside because what was more important was getting people enrolled. But I know that we as a coalition have worked harder to communicate in this off period time, and hopefully that will continue during open enrollment, which starts on November 15th.
That's great. Well, let's see if we have any questions. Oh, yes. You got one more?
Well, I was just
Just
gonna
don't
add
call it, don't use the word dunderhead.
Okay, all right. I'm going to try to restrain myself.
Okay.
It's hard when I talk about HHS. So I think in terms of roadblocks, one sort of interesting, maybe it's more of a parable, what you were saying about the broker, Sandy, I thought was really funny. The broker, that's what happens when agents and brokers give tax advice. That sort of there's an underlying roadblock there, which is regulatory, right? Is that the state regulates and to a certain extent the feds regulate, and every state regulates differently. Insurance, giving insurance advice and also giving tax advice. And that was one thing that we struggled with as we tried to put together a program as a tax preparer. How do we help people, if the end goal is to get people signed up, how do we make this work when we're not going to go out and get licensed and fit all our people licensed in 50 states as insurance agents? So one answer is really clever contracting and partnering with organizations who are licensed in 50 states. And we found one of the 3 web-based entities, getinsured.com, out in Silicon Valley, who could fulfill that need for us. And so Jackson Hewitt, we do not give insurance advice, and we're very clear on that, and our contracts are really there's some pretty draconian language in there about not giving insurance advice. We help people apply for government programs, just like filing taxes. And then there's a very clear handoff to get insured when you want to start talking about deductibles and such. And I think that's just by way of saying that as we move forward, enrollment's going to get harder because we're trying to pull people off the fence who are not necessarily we're not compelled in the first open enrollment period, and I just think it's reasonable to assume it gets harder. And also, the tax and insurance stuff gets much more mucky as we go forward, right? We've got now penalties that are increasing and very large. We've got the reconciliation of the tax credit, which although that broker may not have represented it very well, there certainly is a chance you could have to repay significant portions of your 36B tax credit, the premium assistance tax credit. So as these lines get blurred and regulation is not keeping up with it, and it's different in every state, I think that those partnerships and working closely, mission and goals and ideas are important, but ultimately, for example, what Brian and I decided when we went to the dark side was that by hook or by crook, we were going to get people signed up for the ACA. And we didn't care who we had to work with to make that happen. And on some level, I think
I won't take that personally. Thank you. It's all right. I'm sorry.
No, I mean, really, we had real reservations about going to work for the tax prep industry. We really did. It is historically a very dirty business, and in many quarters remains so. But we recognized that it was going to be an important part moving forward of getting people signed up. So I guess I would just offer that, on some level, you have to ask yourself whether you're committed to staying true to your principles, or whether there's an overriding goal, which is to help people, and you're willing to make some allowances for that. And that we voted with our feet, and I think Kathy and Kristen and many organizations in Tennessee voted with theirs by working with us and with other with the insurance industry in this state and with other for-profit hospital corporations, things like that. So, and it's turned out pretty well, I'd say.
Yeah, we're all standing, and there's no blood evident. It's really been actually as much of a success, I think, as any of us could hold for. And we're not going to bore you with statistics, but despite all of the roadblocks, we had some pretty good outcomes, and we're looking forward to the future. What questions do you have about cross-sector partnerships, collective impact, collaborations that maybe we could address? This is called We're Hungry and We Want to Go to Lunch.
This week, the Kaiser Family Foundation released a report saying 9 out of 10 uninsured people don't know that open enrollment is going to begin in November 15th. Right. So my question is, what have you learned in this past cycle that will help you as a partnership and as a collaborative to make that information get out there and to help people get enrolled?
Well, they will be receiving a letter from CMS as well as from their carrier, and letting them know that, open enrollment is coming up. They have the option to just renew if everything is the same. They also have an opportunity to look at some new plans, and things have shifted. So they will get 2 notifications. We are going to be instrumental in getting the word out in most of the places that we did before, health clinics, libraries, places like that, who were very supportive of the effort. And that's where we enrolled a lot of people, so that's going to be helpful.
We had, how many, in the coalition, we have how many agencies, organizations?
About 15.
15? I was going to say 14, 15. And the total number of volunteers that represents, as well as staff, goes into the tens of thousands, if not more than that, across the state, boots on the ground, people knocking on doors, people showing up at public events, setting up coexistence, embedding into the VITA sites. So when people show up to get help with their tax preparation, there are navigators and assisters there. Coalition has been quite innovative and trying to get the word out. And I really liked, I think, Kristen, you said the being courageous is, I think, the encouragement that we want to give you today. To be courageous enough to enter into unusual partnerships because we are all operating in a limited resources environment, right? And so how do we get the word out? How do we maximize what no one of us can do, regardless of what that mission is? And this is just one example that we hope will be an encouragement to you. Any other questions or comments?
Hey, Kathy, can I make just one more comment on that? There's a partnership with United Way for some marketing. We wish that it was much larger in terms of really blanketing the state, but there will be, at least locally in the Middle Tennessee region, some marketing about places where folks can call. We're co-opting a 1-800 number connector software program that North Carolina used successfully last year and now is being sold by Enroll America, and so that we will be able to do both call and online scheduling of appointments with in-person assistance. And so hopefully my understanding, and you all correct me if this is wrong, but there will be some marketing around this 1-800 number and how you can call this number and receive at least appointment with someone in your local area that can help walk you through the process. So that's coming. I'm not sure the exact date that the marketing push is going to start, but probably early November. The mayor's having a kickoff November 10th at Lentz.
Yes,
Is that correct?
November 10th at Lentz.
So my guess is that you'll be hearing more about all of this as we get closer to the November 15th date. But one of the lessons learned, I think, from last year is that we did need to have, and if funding was unlimited, I'm sure we all would have loved to have more marketing dollars to really get the word out. But we did have to really rely on our partners with earned media, so different news stories, and certainly the mayor's office helping us to coordinate events, and news stations do like to cover the mayor, so that was helpful. But we will be working on that, and you'll see more of that in the next few weeks.
We've got a question, I think maybe our last one. I am also afraid of Dean Sharla. Hey now.
Well, first I'd just like to say bravo. I think this is one of the boldest and best examples of collective impact in our community. And I'm wondering, particularly in the early stages, the ACA has been nothing, if nothing, full of a lot of unknowns. And how did you as a group deal with that? Again, particularly in the early stages.
I think one of our earlier panelists said sometimes you don't know what you don't know, but you just go ahead and start walking anyway. And I think that's an awful lot of what we did. We had a lot of, I know there were evenings that Beth would get a phone call at 5 o'clock, and it was a game changer kind of a phone call. And it was all hands on deck, just everybody scatter, get the email out, make the phone calls, get in touch with all the partners, and people just rallied. Well, this is what we heard. Is that what you heard? Does that confirm? Do you? And it was a little bit of like a strategic ops kind of almost a military. We got to get everybody on this same page in the same way. Some days that was highly energizing. Some days that was just other words besides dunderhead that might have popped up and occurred to some of us involved in all of that. You know, if you wait until you have all the answers, the train's gone. It is out of the station and your opportunity is passed. And I think one of the things that I will speak just from my observation of the team and the partnership is that we forged many, many paths that went to a dead end and we had to back up and start again. And, you know, we got good at trailblazing, if nothing else. We maybe didn't get to where we thought we were going to go. We ended up somewhere else. I think the process has been as valuable as the actual product, but we're also grateful that a really positive product has come along and we've experienced a good outcome. So don't be afraid of what you don't know. I think people who focus and are heading in the right direction, the answers come to them. Y'all, thank you for staying engaged with us. I know you're hungry. Dean?